Hi, everyone. So apologies for all of that chatter that you heard just as you were coming in. That was my fault. I'm having connectivity issues, and so we will do our best, but that is absolutely my fault, and I do apologize for that. I want to I need to change something here. Okay. All right. So it's almost time to begin, so we'll wait another minute for people to be able to join in. I'm really happy that you're here, and we'll start in just a minute or so.
And for those of you who are coming in, thank you for using the chat room to say hello, letting us know from where you're coming from today. I would ask, please, that if you look at your to window in the chat, that you flip it to panelists and attendees so that everyone has a chance to see your thinking. And then I see your switch to just panelists too. So if you want to flip that over, that would be great. Karen, great to see you here. Thanks for joining in. Gurdarshan, good to have you. And again, if you want to flip it to panelists and attendees, everyone can see you. Shannon Lee, good to see you. Thank you. Wonderful to have you with us today. Gersh, how are you? That's wonderful. I'm seeing lots of my friends from Peel. So great to see you all today. Antoinette, thank you for joining in. Awesome to have you. And again, make sure your to window has panelists and attendees showing. We're getting people in from straight across the province, lots of school districts being represented. So happy that you're able to take the time to join with us today. Good to see so many friends.
Anna, can I ask you to share your screen right away, since I'm not connected as I usually am, so that I can look off of your slides to start?
Absolutely.
I have them in front of me, so I'm okay. I just can't connect them because I'm using my phone for the Zoom.
Absolutely. The
Thank
only
you.
thing that will be missing is your land acknowledgement.
I have that in front of me, so I'm good to go.
And I do see that the time has reached 4:15, so if we want to get started to honor everyone's time, that would be terrific.
Perfect. So my name is Nedzine Trépanier-Bisson, and I know that you can't see me today. Apologies for that. I'm the Director of Professional Learning at OPC, and today I'm joined by Luciana Cardarelli with CPCO, as well as Anna and Jen, who are two practicing principals, and Christine Sertam from the University of Ottawa, and as well as Brad, who is behind the scenes supporting us with technical issues through this webinar. So I want to begin with a land acknowledgement this afternoon, and as I do so, I would invite you to bring to mind the lands on which you are right now. So I am on the land in Toronto, so I want to acknowledge the land that I am on, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. This land is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I also acknowledge that this land is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And I want to take a moment on behalf of myself and my colleagues to acknowledge the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on the lands on which we gather today across Ontario. And I thank the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. These lands are gathering points where age-old ceremonies of celebration, initiation, and renewal took place. I am grateful to have the opportunity to work and learn on these lands in a community of sharing. And normally, if I was able to share my PowerPoint, you would see some lovely photos of some time I had this summer at the cottage and in Bay St. Paul, where I did some sea kayaking. And I share those photos as a reminder to myself of how that land, that connection with the water and with the land from the summer just changed my energies and allowed me to feel energized and to be ready to get back to work. And showing those pictures and remembering that regularly helps me to get back in that space of quietude and moving forward with work. And so I would invite you, if you have one of those connections to the land as well, to bring that to mind from time to time. Given everything that's going on, I think we all need any little bit of respite that we can have. And I want to take a moment to, Anna, can you move me to the next? Thank you. All right, so I want to take a moment to talk a little bit about the OLF. So as you know, the Ontario Leadership Framework is foundation to much of the work we do as school leaders, and these webinars are no exception. So in looking at the math curriculum and the role of principals and vice principals in implementing it, we felt that there were many connections possible with the OLF, but we decided to highlight the connection to promoting collaborative learning cultures, because the work of implementation of this curriculum is not just the work of principals and vice principals, it is really the work of the school community. And that community includes obviously teachers and other school staff, but it includes students and it includes parents. And so we really thought that that was a very good place for us to focus in connecting to the OLF, and you'll see that that comes out throughout the webinar in terms of our connection to that collaborative process for moving forward. And you will notice that we are recording this session. We will be sharing, I would expect early next week, the PowerPoint itself, as well as a link to the recording. And any other information that we're sharing today, you'll see that there are some links further on. So you'll have all of the links in the PowerPoint, and that information will be available to you. We will also be sharing a feedback form. And if you take a few minutes to return that to us or to fill it out, it's a Google form, that will be really helpful to us, as it will help to inform our next steps as we work together to support you through this 3 Associations project. So with that, Anna, I will turn it over to you to lead us through the beginning part of the webinar.
Thank you so much, Nadine. As Nadine introduced me, I'm Anna Mena, and I'm a principal with the Trillium Lakelands District School Board. And Nadine's land acknowledgement made me connect to the Indigenous worldview of sharing. And that's an important piece of how we educate ourselves and the others around us. And the whole sense that knowledge is about contributing to the well-being of the whole. And that's why you are here, why I am here, and my colleagues are here today. So with that in mind, I'd like to invite you to do something that might be reminiscent of a real, I would say real, in-person workshop or conference that you might have attended in the past. And that is to invite someone else to the table with you. One of my favorite things to do is to listen to a presenter and then have, yes, sometimes a sidebar conversation when the presenter is presenting about something that has sparked my interest or my curiosity or inspired me to do something new or different at my school. So in the chat box, you will see that Brad has posted a link. I invite you to invite a friend to join us today so that you can have those conversations by texting, or after the webinar, you may want to pick up the phone, hands-free of course, when you're driving home, or pick up the phone if you happen to be lucky enough to walk home on a beautiful day like today. So while you're doing that, I wanted to show you the roadmap of what our hour together will look like, just for a road trip. So we will start with getting our heads in the game. Then we will move on to what you need to know with Dr. Christine Sertam. And that includes some of the evidence-based research with the new math curriculum, neat things to pay attention to, and the beauty and importance of the new math curriculum. Next, Jennifer Vieira will take you through where to start with your staff and your students. You can notice some of the things that are similar, some of the things that are different, and engage some strategies to move ourselves forward. And then finally, we'll wrap up with, how do you lead through all of this? What are some questions? What are some things you can say to begin those discussions with the new math curriculum? So, did you text a friend? You have your critical friend to converse with? Are you ready to go on this trip with us? Let's get started. So let's get our heads in the game, and my hat off to you already, because number one, you've donated your time to learn more about the math curriculum after school hours, and already that tells us that you are ready to think about something other than the COVID cloud that's over top of us. So with that, I'd like to invite you to just write down a few things that are in your mind right now, things that you're juggling at school, things to do with education, anything that comes to mind in terms of what you are doing at your schools right now. I'm sure your list isn't fully filled out at this point because you're juggling a lot of things. Let me share some of the things that are on my list. Things that I'm trying to make sense of include: how will a second wave of COVID affect schools? Will there be enough funding to implement the safety requirements? Where do I start with the new math curriculum? And how am I going to lead this new math curriculum? Your list may be similar, it may have some differences. That's okay. What I'd like you to do on that same piece of paper is just draw a circle of influence. Now, a circle of influence is basically defined as all those things that you have power over, things that you can control, things that you can affect change with. So when I look at my list, that would include: where do I start with a new math curriculum? And how am I going to lead this new math curriculum? The second circle I ask you to draw around the circle of influence is the circle of concern. Now, the circle of concern, it's pretty much all those things that you worry about, but in truth, you have very little to no power over. So for me, from my list, that would be: how would a second wave of COVID affect schools? And the worry that, will there be enough funding to implement the safety requirements? If you want to look at your lists of all the things that you're juggling and worrying about and sort them into the circle of influence and circle of concern, I think you know where I'm going with this. And that is to specifically spend our time in our circle of influence. And the reason being is that good leaders are proactive people. So when we spend our time in things that we can affect change with, what happens is we create this energy and we have results. And when people see us having results, they're more likely to join us and create even bigger results, causing our circle of influence to actually increase. When we neglect those things that are in our circle of influence and spend time in our other circle, what happens is we kind of spin our wheels. We worry a lot, but we are not very effective in terms of what we do. And as a result, our circle of influence shrinks. So that was just a little Stephen Covey during this time of COVID for you to consider. And so when we look at this new math curriculum, I could go into my circle of concern and say to myself, what was the government thinking when they thought that it'd be a good idea to roll out a brand new curriculum in the middle of a pandemic? Instead, I could shift my thinking and go to my circle of influence, and I could look at, well, something new with this new math curriculum is that we just have one mark for math. So that opens up a lot of opportunities. We can do some cross-strand math, and we can play with the mathematical modeling. The other part that I thought was really interesting about the timing is that we don't have to worry about EQEO this year. So that genuinely gives an opportunity for us to play with the math. And really, we can make mistakes, and there's no high stakes of failure associated with EQEO in this instance. So we get to play and experiment. The next part I thought was wonderful about the new curriculum was that we actually have 4 years to implement it. So those new content pieces, for example, coding and financial literacy, instead of thinking about, oh boy, we need to close that gap right this year, we need to shift that thinking to, we have 4 years. Let's see where the students are, and let's see how far we can move them along. And then in previous years, social emotional learning was implied. And then this year, and the beginning of this new curriculum, the social emotion learning is explicitly stated, giving us a chance to really focus during the math on those learning processes. So while you have those positives, those things, a circle of concern out, but pieces that are circle of influence in our brains, I'd like you to keep that in perspective as you hear from Dr. Christine Sertam in terms of what you need to know with a new math curriculum.
Thanks, Anna. So I'll share my screen, carry on. It's great to see so many people here. It's just amazing the work that you're all doing, the difficult situations that you're in, and you're still making the time to come and hear about the math curriculum. I just think that's wonderful. I would also like to continue the land acknowledgement discussion. I actually today happen to be in St. Catharines, but I'd like to talk about the land that I usually reside on, which is in Ottawa, and the land of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. And I think about that land quite often as I do love to do morning walks along the Rideau River, which is fairly close to my house. And it's a time of reflection and recognizing some of the things that we really need to value. So that being said, I'd like to talk about sort of my role in terms of the curriculum, as well as just a snapshot of some of the things I wanted to share with you. So I was the lead researcher on preparing a background research report for the curriculum writers, and that occurred January to April of 2019. That was a short period of time. We did a heck of a lot of work, and I had many graduate students and also some people from school boards working to help to gather the information needed to prepare that report. And I'll give you some highlights of that. And then I also worked as a research advisor, meeting with the ministry kind of once a week for a few hours a week. Again, I didn't write the curriculum, but I would answer some of their questions about what research do we have around this particular aspect, or review materials with a research lens, etc. So that was from last September until this past May. And it was a great experience to work with them and kind of hear their thinking. So I want to provide some highlights of some of the research. So the research that we did for the report included analysis of a variety of different curricula. So we looked at curriculum mainly from high-performing jurisdictions, countries, or provinces, and also those places that had a fairly recent curriculum that we knew also was research-based. So that could be Australia, BC, Quebec, Singapore, as well as some of the other places that had particular topics. So for instance, we look at the Netherlands because I know that a lot of theirs is based on research on learning trajectories. We also excuse me, looked at current research literature from some of the top international and Canadian math education research journals. And so we looked at what has happened in research in topics around how students learn mathematics since the 2005 curriculum until 2020. So how is it that students learn number? What do we know about spatial reasoning? As well as what do we know about particular pedagogical approaches in mathematics that work really well? We also consulted with Ontario math education researchers, other researchers. We didn't want just my viewpoint or my research team's viewpoint. We spoke to other researchers to find out what is either some research that they happen to be doing in Ontario schools that is important to include, or research that they know of that would help to inform the curriculum, and we included that. And we also had focus groups with Ontario math educators. We had Francophone focus groups and Anglophone. And those could include teachers, or they could include what I would call leaders in math education, consultants or coaches, and others. So that we tried to gather quite a bit of information in that short time to be able to provide to the ministry. We also reminded them, and I'm going to remind all of us, that we actually do quite well. And so it's important not to, I guess we'd use the expression, not throw out the baby with the bathwater, which is a really weird expression. But in international assessments, Canada is seen as a very, very high performing country in mathematics achievement. And we often don't hear about that. And not only do they have a high achievement, but we also have high equity. And there are a couple of ways to measure that. One way is that the gap between our high achievers and our low achievers is fairly small, which means that all of the work that we are doing within schools helps our students to achieve, even when there might be other factors in their life that might cause them to have a lower achievement. So that's huge. That's a pat on the back for all of the work that you do as administrators and that teachers do in classrooms. And we also know within Canada, Ontario is a high-performing province. On the Pan-Canadian assessment in mathematics, Ontario outperformed most other provinces. We were second behind Quebec. So it's important to maintain what we do well and also to celebrate that we do things quite well. And as I say, that's a celebration of the work that you do. We made recommendations around all kinds of things: content, structure, professional learning, implementation, assessment. I'm not going through everything today, just some highlights. One around content, we included new research. We suggested that in the content that's in the curriculum, that new research be included around learning trajectories, cross-strand, cross-curricular connections. We encouraged looking at topics such as mathematical modeling, financial literacy, computational thinking, which is more commonly known as coding, as well as expanding spatial reasoning. So that spatial reasoning isn't just thinking about geometry and measurement. We think about spatial reasoning when we do numbers. Students see numbers, and we encourage that they see it, whether it's in a tens frame or base 10 blocks, all kinds of ways. A number line, if they're doing integers, it's a visual representation and a spatial representation. But the spatial reasoning is in all kinds of other subjects. Drama, how they position themselves on that stage, dance, art, geography, all kinds of areas use spatial reasoning. So we also recommended that with much of the new content that teachers are going to need support, whether it's a learning continuum, videos of what this looks like, samples of student tasks, a glossary of some particular terms, and that those kinds of supports should be ongoing and should be easily accessible so that teachers don't have to search all over the place to try to find those supports. And I think that you see some of that coming out in the way that the curriculum is in a digital format, and many of the supports are all kind of in that sort of space. And from what I hear, there are more supports coming. I'm going to focus on one particular topic because I can't really talk about all of them in today's, and I'm going to talk about algebraic reasoning. So quite often when people say algebra, we think about X's and Y's, manipulating all those symbols, adding like terms. But really, we've gone well beyond that in our algebraic thinking, even in the 2005 curriculum. You know that there's a great deal in terms of patterning and relationships in that curriculum, about students recognizing patterns, describing patterns, being able to make predictions to describe the patterns in words, later in the intermediate grades using symbols. So we've already kind of moved further than some other jurisdictions, but we're going a few steps further with that idea of introducing coding. And coding is a way of integrating symbols, relationships, logical thinking, and having students recognize patterns and repeating those patterns, having students be able to give very clear direction, which is a skill that's needed in all kinds of things, as well as mathematical modeling, which is really about taking a real world messy problem and trying to think about how might I approach this mathematically. And I'm going to give you some examples of mathematical modeling. So first of all, before we go to the examples, the idea of a mathematical model isn't, I think sometimes people think, oh, that means using manipulatives to model the math idea. In this case, it means something way bigger. And this actual diagram is taken from the curriculum. It's a diagram of mathematical modeling. It's about understanding the problem, analyzing that problem, deciding what assumptions we're going to make, creating a mathematical model, which I'll call a solution. So it doesn't have to be a concrete model. And then analyzing and applying the model. It might work, it might not. We might need to go back again and try to look at how could I change that model. And so in the end, we have a model that would help us predict and make decisions. And I know that you are all very familiar with a mathematical model. If there's one thing that COVID did, it put the term mathematical model in people's mouths. So this is a very familiar math model, and it's a really good example of the idea that this mathematical model of, what we saw, you can see that this is from March. Now we would look at models that deal with the second wave. But that people talked about, we've gathered data to talk about how this virus might behave, but we also have data about what would happen based on human behavior. And so something to keep in mind is that when we talk about mathematical models, we not only look at data, we also look at human behavior, and we make assumptions about human behavior. And we hear that all the time when we hear people talking, particularly about COVID. But here's another mathematical model that you might be familiar with, but you maybe never thought about in that way. I'm sure that many of us, just not recently, have flown on planes, and you've often sat waiting for that flight, and all of a sudden they announce, we need 3 more people. We need 3 people to say that they will get off this flight. We'll give them a voucher. We'll do this. We'll do that. The longer you wait, seems like the more that voucher seems to be worth. And you must sit there thinking, why are they kicking people off this flight? Why would they be selling tickets that they don't even have seats for? I mean, it doesn't make sense, does it? But they actually have used a mathematical model that some mathematician has created for that particular flight, because it depends on the time of day, that determines how many tickets they actually could sell for that flight. And they usually oversell, because they know, based on human behavior, some people miss their flight, some people will miss their connection, other people will miss a previous connection and need to get on the flight. So they take all of those factors into play and create a mathematical model that helps them determine how many airplane seats they might need to sell. Now you're probably wondering, yes, but what are we going to do in elementary school? We're not going to have them develop COVID models or airplane models. One thing that I talked about in terms of primary was it could be a mathematical model about how to set up a lemonade stand. In junior or intermediate grades, it could be about setting up a school newsletter as a fundraiser. And so I'll just talk about one particular aspect. Maybe they're going to sell advertising. So what they need to do is gather data in terms of how much might some of our local businesses be willing to pay for advertising. And then they might use proportional reasoning to think about, okay, so if we have a half-page ad, how much should we charge for that if we're going to charge a certain amount for a quarter-page ad? And then they start to develop some of those things. So these ideas of mathematical models cross strands. So you can see number sense, financial literacy, working with ratios and proportion, determining area, all kinds of things such as that coming into play. Another one I think of might be great for intermediate grades would be what uses less water, taking a shower or taking a bath. So they might gather some data, but they also would have to think about human behavior. How long does somebody spend in a shower, for instance? I don't know if you really want to go there, but anyway, it's an idea. So back to some of the recommendations that we made. We emphasize the importance of implementation and providing support for the implementation. We have the written curriculum, but how it actually becomes the enacted curriculum that we see in classrooms is really dependent on the resources that we provide, the time, the space, and actual other resources for teachers to be able to implement it. That could be space, time to talk, time to share, sample tasks, videos of what this looks like in a classroom. And so one of the recommendations was around providing those kinds of support. And some of the recommendations around implementation, one, as I said, that it's critical component, that the curriculum should also encourage a variety of pedagogical approaches, that some of the implementation that teachers that will need to provide would be to develop that new teacher knowledge in content areas that are a bit different. And much as I talk about that we need a variety of pedagogical approaches for students in classrooms, we also need a variety of professional learning opportunities and approaches for teachers. One, because the kinds of knowledges they need are different. So if they need knowledge about coding, it might be about a workshop. But if they need to be able to think through what will I do with these long-range plans, they might need teacher collaboration and getting together and kind of sorting out some of that. So the idea is that we need different ways of approaching that. So kind of in conclusion or summary, just some reminders that we need to support everyone to be confident math learners. So that's not just students, but we need to be able to support teachers, and we need to be able to support administrators. Many of you I know from some of the summer institutes, math institutes we've done around helping principals become more comfortable with some of the math. And we know that part of developing math knowledge in a classroom is providing space for students to take risks, make mistakes, try out new ideas. And what we have to recognize as leaders in the school is that we have to provide the same kind of space for teachers to try out new ideas, to try out pedagogical ideas, mathematical ideas, and to make mistakes and to make adjustments. And also to recognize that learning takes time. And as much as we know that teachers need to provide space and time to listen to students' learning, we know that principals need to make space to listen to the teachers' learning and to help them to continue. They're all in a different place. Just like our students are all in a different place, our teachers are all in a different place. And to me, the goal is to move them along their own journey, not necessarily to get everybody to the same place at the same time. So I'm going to hand this over to Jennifer now.
Thank you. Just going to share my screen. Okay, so where do we start? Well, I'm going to start off first of all by introducing myself. My name is Jennifer Vieira, and I'm a principal in the Dufferin-Peel Catholic District School Board. And I am blessed and very grateful to be here on the Indigenous territory of the New Credit First Nation, a people who truly appreciate true stewardship and appreciation of the land, which is something I can connect to because in my own personal love of mathematics, I can draw inspiration from that and my love of mathematics and the connection we see to nature. So thank you so much for having me join in today. So now where do we start in terms of this new math curriculum at a school? So as administrators, we want to support our teachers to develop their own mathematical well-being so that they in turn can support their teachers to develop their students' mathematical well-being. So what we're going to do today is we're going to explore a potential area in the area of social emotional learning that you might consider using as a starting point. Given the context right now and the difficulty in some of the learning conditions in our schools, it's definitely a very appropriate place to begin in the first 90 days. So what I'm going to show you on the screen here is a strand overview chart. This chart is found in the mathematics curriculum. It is linked. It's called Strand Aid Chart in the Strand Overview of Social Emotional Learning. And we decided to take this chart here and approach it as a framework to move some of the learning forward. The social emotional learning is a new area that's in this curriculum that's being highlighted, and we thought it was definitely appropriate and worth the time to engage in this area in the very beginning days. So if you take a look at the screen here, what we've done is we've taken the chart and blown up the left-hand column there for you to take a look at. So what we're going to start with is take a look at the chart, the numbers there, number 1 to 6, just do a quick read. And my question for you is, what does this remind you of? So if you wouldn't mind just a few words, feel free to add to the chat box. A few words that you come to mind when you take a look at 1 to 6. What does this remind you of? And I'm going to ask Luciana, if you don't mind. I don't have access to the chat in front of me right now, but if you wouldn't mind just reading a few as they're shared.
Thanks, no problem, Jennifer. I'm seeing self-regulation show up. Mirrors from the HPE curriculum. Mindfulness, learning skills.
Very nice. All excellent suggestions. Did anyone make a connection or see potential learning goals here?
PLR has also popped up, which is a very interesting connection.
Very nice. So we're going to take a look. They're all very good connections, which, by the way, it's really important for you to help your own staff make connections to where they are. So those are all really possible starting points. For the purpose of today, we're just going to explore this as the potential area of learning goals. So if we took a look at these as potential learning goals in the area of social emotional learning, we would want to take a look at connecting to something we already know. So we're all very familiar with learning goals. We work through learning goals in all subject areas. So what we're going to try and do here is make connections to something that's familiar, something that we already know. And if we're already familiar with learning goals, it's a nice place to be connected to give us a sense of calm, a sense of familiarity. In these days where a lot of people are feeling a lot of anxiety and a lot of feelings of concern and worry. So connecting to something we're already doing well is a good starting point. So if you take a look at these 6 learning goals, we would evolve these learning goals potentially over the course of the year. So these wouldn't be seen as learning goals that we're only going to introduce, for example, in September, possibly October, but we'd be looking at how can we co-construct these learning goals through our instruction with kids throughout the course of the year. But it's definitely a good starting point for the first 90 days. So if you take a look at the right-hand column now, we've blown this one up. I'm going to ask you the same question. Can you take a look at this particular list here? And then can you throw out a few words into the chat room in terms of what does this list or what does this set of numbers remind you of?
Success criteria. Look fors.
Very nice. So you see where I'm going with this. So if you take a look at these.
Growth mindset's also popping up.
Perfect, exactly. So familiar areas, correct? So we're landing again in the area of familiar, the work that we're already doing and we're already grounded in. So if we look at exploring these as a set of success criteria, these are not in any particular order. These do not have a direct match of one to one, 2 to 2 with the other lists that we just looked at. They're in no particular order, but you can take a look and see how they could potentially become the success criteria that we can co-construct with our kids along the year. So if you look a little closely, where else can we ground some of this work in the work we're already doing? So let me just go through a couple of examples. If you see number 1, you can see some really strong connections here to the area of self-regulation. Moving down in the chart, number 2, strong sense of connection and resiliency there. Number 3, I'm glad you found the growth mindset. Number 3 really stands out in terms of growth mindset, looking at it's important to learn from our mistakes. Moving down further, you can see some collaborative math talk there. Number 5, I really see strong connections there to self-efficacy in math. So student self-efficacy, teacher self-efficacy. So as you can see, just going through a few of those, what we're suggesting as a nice place to start is to connect to the familiar, connect to the work you've already been doing. So if you're already spending some time exploring some of these areas, such as growth mindset, that might make for a good starting point. And if you've really worked deeply already in growth mindset and are looking to engage a little further in a different area, you may move on to something in self-efficacy. So the key with these success criteria here would be that we're engaging in them in the context of math. So we don't want to look at these as we're going to teach this through the concept of self-regulation. We're going to teach this through the concept of self-regulation in the context of the mathematics lesson. So a rich mathematical task where there's some engagement happening in the context of math. So it's very important that we not only do we unpack this slowly through the year, but we unpack this with our students in a way where they're engaged in math. And why are we doing this? One of the most important pieces in terms of connecting social emotional learning skills in math, and there's a lot of research to support this, is that these skills are needed to engage in the mathematics for us to be able to go more deeply in the math. So when we're engaging in a math problem, we need to be able to persevere. We need to be able to collaborate with others. We need to be able to persevere, make mistakes, try again. There's an incredible amount of skill that's needed in terms of persevering in order to be successful in that math task. So now we're bringing your attention here to the center area of this framework. Again, these are the 7 mathematical processes. These are the same 7 mathematical processes you would have seen in the last curriculum. They are very important. We know that they are what drives the mathematics context, what drives the mathematics content. So they are still here. So if your staff is solidly working in this area, again, some familiar. If this is an area you're still working on with your staff, you have a place to start here. So we know that we're connecting to the familiar now to help bring a sense of calm to everyone. We know it's an appropriate place given the conditions we're in right now in the middle of our pandemic, but how might we begin some of these conversations with our staff? So when we look at that SEL framework or the chart, think about some of the questions you can pose to begin those conversations. Questions such as, where do we see ourselves in this learning environment? What do we need for our own well-being in order to support the well-being of our students? Where might be a good starting point? And if we can work through some of these areas with our staff, what we're doing is really just modeling how they will move that forward with their own students. This particular visual here is a visual to help us connect to those anchor charts. Those anchor charts that we're co-constructing with kids. Some of our prompts could be, what does it look like? What does it sound like? And what does it feel like? So when we're unpacking those success criteria, the heart, which talks about the feel like, really helps us to pull out more explicitly that social emotional piece, the feelings that are important to address and name, so that, for example, when I'm working with my friend and trying to solve this problem and I'm getting frustrated because the answer isn't obvious to me, I can persevere through it and I understand that that feeling is okay. I am feeling frustrated. I am feeling a bit puzzled, but that's okay. That's part of the process of working through it. And if we model co-constructing these types of anchor charts with our own staff and addressing our own social emotional, connect to some of those for our teachers, then what we're doing is modeling it for them so that they can go and do that with their own kids in their own class. Okay, so just to kind of summarize so far what we're looking at is, we know we have to connect to a mindset in order to begin this work. We've taken a look at some of the highlights of the new math curriculum and what we need to know. And now we've looked at a potential starting point landing in the area of social emotional learning. So how do we lead this mathematics learning in this current context with everything that's on our plate right now, with the distractions that are there? Where might we start? And one of the areas that we would like to pay attention to is the fact that we are co-learning this together. So because this new math curriculum is new for everyone, it puts us in a good position to position ourselves as a co-learner along with our staff. And when we talk about coming to the table as a co-learner, what we're talking about is moving beyond coming to a PLC and working through a set of norms that when we come to the table, we know these are the conditions in which we do this learning. Instead, what we're doing is we're moving from working through a set of norms together to coming to the table with a learning stance. It's a way of being, it's a way of carrying ourselves so that we are presenting ourselves as learners. And when we present ourselves as a co-learner with staff, we move away from the expert or the lead to someone who is learning alongside with you and learning from you, learning with you. So in terms of being explicit with this with our staff, here are some areas you can take a look at and probe a little more with your staff. For example, a great question would be, how do we intentionally create these conditions to engage in the new learning together? Or perhaps in this day, how do we recreate those conditions for us to come together and learn this new learning together? What are the components of mathematical well-being that are most important to us that we need to have in place in order to move this forward? If we're going to come to the table as learners, we need to be able to ask thoughtful questions. We need to be able to reflect on our learning. So as administrators, how do we present that in a way that it's authentic so that we don't just bring it to the table when we're learning at a PLC, but day to day we are authentically engaging with our staff as a co-learner. So just a few highlights here that would just help to kind of bring that co-learning stance to the table at the forefront with our teachers so that they know we are working through this together.
And Jennifer, when you and I have spoken, we've often talked about leaving our title at the door when we enter the conversations. But sometimes other people will pick up that title and think they're being helpful and bring it along into the conversation. What kind of specific moves do you do in order to avoid that?
Yeah, so that's where being authentic definitely helps in terms of positioning yourself as an authentic co-learner in everything that you do. But also, sometimes we acknowledge that everyone in their own role has something useful and insightful from their own experience to bring to the table. And that's how we learn from each other. Different people have different insights. And that's something that we discuss as well.
Thank you. One of the things I do is I wait for everyone else to participate. I let them feed the conversation, and then I notice those people that are still sitting back quietly, and I invite them to share their ideas. And typically, like you said, it's the asking the questions to draw things out rather than providing the answers that may be limited, especially since we're all learning this new curriculum together.
Yeah, exactly. Very good point, Anna. So Anna, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to pass that over to you.
Thank you. In the chat box, what you will see, hopefully, is a link to a Jamboard. And in a minute, if you can all join me, I'd like you to take a minute just to picture a mathematics classroom, an intermediate classroom. One that, well, it could be a classroom, it could be outdoors because it's been such an amazing fall, or it could be even a virtual one if you happen to be a principal of a virtual school. So just picture an intermediate mathematics classroom.
And I just want to say, Anna, yesterday we had some issues with people joining the Jamboard. So it may be that you're not able to get in because it limits it to, I believe, 50 participants, and there are more than 50 of us on here today. So if you're not able to join, don't worry about it. You can drop in any ideas you have in the chat. We will be looking to collate the ideas that are in the Jamboard, and Anna will be sharing her screen, I believe, so you'll be able to see some of the ideas there.
So if you haven't used a Jamboard before, you'll see on the left-hand side, there's some icons. The icon that I'm circling that says sticky note, you can just click on that and post your ideas about some of the thoughtful and reflective questions you can ask your intermediate teachers in regards to math.
So feel free to join in. We've got about 15 or so on the Jamboard at this point, and we see our first post-it note coming up on the screen now. And Jennifer and Anna, we have a question that's come up in the chat. How would you create a collaborative math environment through distance learning?
That's another excellent question. And I can highlight some of the ones that we're seeing on the Jamboard. Which strand do you think your students will want to run with and why? Why do some students use the same manipulatives over and over again? How do you know what your students already know? What are some of the favorite math lessons where the students have been most engaged? How can CERTs help in working with a co-teaching model?
And CERTs in many boards are spec ed teachers.
How does this textbook or program connect? Ooh, they're coming in hard and fast now.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting to see the continuum of questions that are popping up. Some questions you can see requires a well-established relationship with the individual. Others lend themselves as entry points for maybe teachers who are new to your staff. And for those of you who may be leading virtual schools, that's pretty much everybody on your staff, I think.
So I don't know about you, but I am looking at these questions as excellent starting points. And I hope you don't mind that I'm going to borrow them from you, my colleagues, when I enter into my discussions with my teachers at my school. These are amazing, and they're open-ended. Oh, look, we have one about anti-Black racism, equity and diversity. Wonderful conversations that we can start with our
Isn't
staff.
it interesting also to see how can I support you in learning code? That notion of being a servant leader, of coming to leadership through humility and seeking to serve others. Lovely. When you talk about social emotional learning, how that stance can make such a huge difference.
Now, these ideas will be available to you afterwards on our webinar. So you can always use them and save them, bookmark them for another time to use with your staff if you wish. The second page of this Jamboard is an opportunity for us to receive feedback. So now that you've listened to what we've had to present, you've had an opportunity to think about some starting questions. What are some cheers, some positive things that you see, you feel, you've heard about, you've thought about with the new curriculum? What are some of your fears? And what are still some of your unclears with the new curriculum? If you don't mind color coding them, that will help us, because in fact, what we hope to do is provide another webinar, well, another few webinars actually, professional learning networks and resources to support you and me and Jennifer with rolling out the new math curriculum. So please put all your ideas here because it helps guide us over the next year.
And for those of you who would prefer to use the chat room, please feel free to enter those questions there. You might want to just preface your question with either cheers or fears or unclears, please.
Feel free to continue your thoughts and add that to the Jamboard. I'm going to just skip back to our slideshow. Can you see the slide?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you're in edit view though, Anna, not presentation mode.
Yep.
There you go. Great, thank you.
It takes me to the wrong slide though.
Mm-hmm.
It's 5 o'clock. It's tired too.
There we go. So at the beginning, I invited you to text a friend, a critical friend, and at the end of our webinar to have an opportunity to have a conversation. So whether on your own or with a friend on the way home, perhaps you'd like to reflect on what approaches you would consider moving forward and implementing the new math curriculum. It's a big question, and remember, just a small shift, a small change can have a huge impact over time. Now, Lucia,
All right,
would you
so
like, oh, thank you, Nadine.
yeah, I can go. So we've also prepared a resource document. So Anna, can you click on that link?
Yes. My computer is really tired today. There we go.
So, all right. So you'll get this link also in the follow-up email. So this document is a living document in the sense that we will continue to add to it as resources become available and as we hear about resources. We've made this a bilingual document. So Anna, we're not seeing it on the screen. I'm wondering if you have to exit out of the PowerPoint.
Okay.
Let me do that. So while Anna's doing that, you'll see that this is a bilingual document. So most of the resources there are available in both languages, but even if they are not, we've made a note of which language they are available in, and we've got a short description for each resource, and those descriptions are in either English or French, regardless of the language of the resource. So we've made to make sure that everyone understands what's in the resource. And you'll see that some of them are not quite complete in terms of the descriptions, and that is on me. I will be finishing that over the next few days. We have all of the descriptions in French. I'm just working on translating them from French to English, and then they'll be available. So that first page that you just saw is the categories of resources. So they're bookmarked in the Google document. So you click on the topic or theme that is of interest, and it will take you directly to that section for those resources. And so then you have a series of resources there. They are all linked. So you will have the links to the resources there, and where you see some red writing, that is where it's only available in one language. So sometimes you'll see that in the English column, sometimes in the French, mostly in the French, because some resources are only available in English. But there are a couple that are only available in French, maybe one or two. And so we're hoping that this is helpful. Even the ministry document, so I noticed in the chat that I believe it was Karen who linked, and Luciana's, some ministry documents when Jen was talking about SEL. So those documents are already linked in that document. And as the ministry advises us of new resources that have come out, we will add them to this. So the idea and the intention behind this was that for principals to have kind of a one-stop shop where they could access any resources that would support the implementation of the curriculum without having to go to a whole bunch of different places and websites to look for resources. And so if you have any suggestions of resources that you don't see there that we could add, what we'll do is, if you have those, you can put them in the chat or you can send us an email. And I think what we'll do is we'll add a link at the bottom of that or at the top of that form to a Google form for people to be able to suggest things to us that we can add. So I think we'll add that as a feature. And we're hoping that this is a useful tool for you that you can bookmark and just come back to it whenever you need it.
You should also
Thanks,
know
Anna.
that the three associations are working with the ministry as well as the math associations, and we've committed to each other to support the releases and the communication of each other's resources and supports. So if you aren't already getting 4 or 5 emails a week from your principal association, it might be that you have not registered for electronic communications. With privacy laws, you have to seek that out. We cannot do that automatically. So you might want to check and register for those communications, because through our association emails and e-blasts, you will be getting lots and lots of information. That link, Michael, is up in the chat a little ways, and it will come to you via the follow-up email as well. And Nadine, I'm seeing that you're asking Brad to paste that in as well, so it's coming.
So that brings an end to our webinar, and I would like to thank all of you for joining us today to be part of our Companions of Exploring this New Math Curriculum. We really appreciate your time, and we look forward to exploring more with you over the next year.
We thank you very much for taking time at this point of your day. We wish you well, stay safe, be strong, know that you're not alone in this journey, and that your work as leaders is very noble and very appreciated. Farewell, my friends, until next time.